So now we move to our second session for today, entitled The Crimes of Empire and Media. And for this session, we have Michael West and Binoy Kampmark on stage. I'd like to invite Michael to speak first. Michael West, many of you will know, is a rare and prized member of the human species, an independent media publisher. You need guts and determination to survive in such a role, and Michael has it in spades. His website regularly exposes the power of corporations and lobby groups over our democracy and the shenanigans of government. The daily newsletter from Michael West Media lists all manner of investigations in the public interest, whether it's into big business, the financial markets, banking, energy, or whistleblowers and the law. Michael's address is entitled Assange and the Media.
Thank you, Mary, and thanks for everybody for coming, and respect to the traditional landowners, and particularly a note of just respect for the father of Julian Assange, John Shipton, who's here and has been a relentless voice. We all know that the pain of the child is borne by the parents as well, and so we sympathise with John and appreciate his efforts. When I first thought about doing a piece on Assange and the media and how far the media was culpable, I immediately, as a huge critic of the corporate media and the mainstream media, looked for all these data points to blame everything on the media, but it's a more nuanced situation than that. It's the guts of it is an institutional failure rather than the failure of individual journalists. There are many more spoken out, like Mary Kostakidis and myself, but most are sympathetic to this persecution rather than prosecution, this enormous injustice and the implications it has for democracy, for freedom of speech, for people's freedom generally. The investigative journalist turned lawyer Mark Davis was with Julian Assange in London at the time the WikiLeaks cables were first published. For 9 years, Davis wrote later, Julian Assange has been accused of risking lives and refusing to redact the names of informers in the 2010 Afghan war logs release. Countervailing this narrative, driven by governments and global media, said Davis, Assange wanted to redact the names. He did redact the names. He wanted to protect the informers, save lives. He did protect the informers. That was not the narrative espoused by the mainstream in the wake of the release of these cables, and that set the stage for what was to come later. And what has come later is that media has become closer to government, partially through the digital revolution and the 24-hour news cycle, which has made press galleries captive to governments reliant on their scoops to feed through into the 24-hour news cycle to be picked up by producers and breakfast radio people. And so they control the narrative still. Now, the journalists from the New York Times and The Guardian went on to enjoy glamorous careers. They wallowed in the prestige of their big WikiLeaks scoop. They wrote books, they gave speeches, and Julian ended up rotting in jail without proper legal process, a speedy trial. He's been persecuted, not prosecuted, and this for working with extraordinary commitment and bravery to force the darkest activities of government into the open. Now, In defamation law, it's the publisher, not the source, who has most to fear. It's the distributors of the news that bear most of the legal risk, although sometimes when you get sued, they'll have a crack at your source as well. This, of course, is not defamation. They're relying on century-old, arcane laws to persecute Julian Assange. But this is an extraordinary case of media failure, although individual journalists are not to blame at all. And if I could, it's hard to grab data points, and I prefer to rely on data points to editorialise, but if I can give some personal experiences, anecdotal experience to give the idea that there's an institutional failure, because most journalists are sympathetic to the case of Julian Assange. Most realise the failure of government and the threat to democracy. So what is it then? Why has there been no concerted campaign, although every juncture of Julian's trials and tribulations has been covered faithfully and professionally by professional journalists? It's all there in the public domain, but it hasn't transpired into political action. At the 2011 Walkley Awards ceremony, all sponsored by corporate media, these things, I was there, and the MEAA, the union, decided that it would be appropriate to give WikiLeaks a gong for journalism. Now, part of the room burst into applause, but maybe 2/3 were not so overjoyed about it. Why is that? Well, anecdotally again, just speaking to journalists over the years about Assange, there's been a number of smears which have played their part. The Swedish assault allegations and so on put some journalists offside. The other thing is really that because government now is so close to media, that even despite the faithful coverage of each point of the trials and Julian's life, there has been no real empathy, no sympathy for him as a man, which drives often political action. There are 3 stages to political action, and I can attest to that through, we did a lot of work on multinational tax avoidance, and basically there was an inquiry, a Senate inquiry in 2015 into multinational tax avoidance, which hitherto had been regarded as being sort of a funky, sophisticated thing, you know. The double Dutch Irish sandwich was quite a glamorous activity. But then the media coverage of that Senate inquiry was huge. And all the media got aboard, not just one. In Australia, you need all the media aboard to effect political change. In the case of Julian, you haven't got all the media on board, even though he transcends the political spectrum. You know, you see pictures of Barnaby Joyce with Andrew Wilkie and some Labor and Liberal and many Greens in the courtyard outside Parliament going into bat for Julian Assange. It isn't really a party political thing. The Hillary Clinton email released by WikiLeaks did not help sympathy for those who were fans of Hillary Clinton, who put off the left. So it's a tricky case, but in the situation of the multinational tax avoidance, to give you the idea about how the media works, there was consensus that yes, this was a scam. Wow, that is actually just a rip-off. Taxpayers are being ripped off. It's not a glamorous thing. And the revelations from that inquiry, the media put them out, were embraced by the community, and there was a realisation, and then the community forced politicians into action. And ironically, it was under the government of Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey where the 2016 laws came into effect, and they've saved taxpayers billions of dollars, and the perception of multinational tax avoidance has changed. It's no longer regarded as a reasonable activity in its most extreme forms. So it needs those 3 components, and unfortunately with Julian Assange, the 3 components have not been there. And institutional media is to blame because the journalists could put the pressure on the politicians. I mean, it's been going to be said more today, and it's already been said, but $368 billion going to UK and US shipyards, financing all their junkets of their officials over here. This incredible transfer of wealth surely could have been used as leverage by Anthony Albanese to have Julian Assange freed. So there has been a failure of the media, even though the journalists themselves have mostly covered the Julian Assange, the epic trial of this historical figure, faithfully. I might just say there is a holier-than-thou component to many journalists, particularly progressive ones, of which I'm one, and that is that you're not a real journalist, this bloke's an internet hacker. Well, of course, he's far more brilliant and his contribution to humanity far greater than any of them. So there's an element of envy that journalists, we're a notoriously bitchy bunch of people, refusing to give accolades to the other side and wanting to get our scoop. It's about vanity as well. But there is a terrific failure at the same time that there is an incredible failure globally to just do the right thing and to stand up for people doing the right thing. We won't go into that now, about to pass over. But the war in Gaza clearly is just the egregious failure of this century, and the media coverage I've never seen such pathetic, corrupted media coverage as there has been. Literally costing thousands of human lives, and that is the media. And by the way, Assange did presage that as well. Thank you very much. I'll hand over now.
Thank you very much, Michael. During the break, someone asked me, well, what should we be looking at? Where should we go for information? And Michael West Media is one site that we can go to. Another one is the public policy website, Pearls and Irritations. And yet another is Declassified Australia. And it was an investigative report investigation conducted by Declassified Australia journalists that provided information for the group of lawyers who filed a complaint about our Prime Minister to the International Criminal Court with regards to what Australia was doing and should not be doing.